Hey, what's up, everybody? Alex from the Balanced Learner here, and welcome to Stuff I Wish They Taught Me. How many times have you ever learned something new in your life, whether it's at a new job or a new class or just a new environment, and after learning that, you looked back and thought, man, I wish someone taught me this a lot sooner? Well, that's the main focus of our show, and we're going to cover a lot of topics relating to education, health, professional development, and things of that nature. So, if you really like the show, or you feel like someone that you know might really benefit from even a few seconds of the information from any of these shows, do me a favor and send it over and make sure you guys subscribe. Our shows are going to come out every Monday morning. It's really the best way for you to start off your week. In today's show, we're going to go over something a little bit different. We're not going to do like a tip or a lesson that I normally do. This show is going to be completely about me. So I know you guys are all out there dying to learn about who I am. I'm just kidding. But I think it's important for me to kind of explain who I am, how I started this podcast, and really my life story, just so that you have a better understanding of, who's speaking into your headphones every day. For those of you who don't know, I currently work as a college advisor at a high school just outside of Los Angeles, and we are definitely a high school with a underrepresented population. And what I mean by that is, low income, first generation students. And actually, a fun fact is I actually serve at the high school that I went to, so I really know what the community is like and what it's all about. So my main role on campus is to pretty much make sure that all the seniors are going to be graduating with a plan, whether that's a community college, a four-year university, or if they decide to go to the military, or if they just want to go straight into the workforce. It's my job to kind of help them along the way. And that includes all the applications, financial aid, personal statements, and things of that nature. And I really love what I do. On the side of that, I'm also starting my master's degree right now at the University of Southern California. I'm getting a master's in educational counseling because ultimately my goal is to be a counselor at a community college, because that ties back to my roots, which I'll talk to you guys a little bit about later. But something I realized early as I took on this position and started working is that there's a lot of little things in life that they don't teach you in school, right? Like how to prepare for an interview, or how to choose a major, or even little life skills like what's the best way to set goals, or being open minded and things like that. And the reason why I created this podcast is because I really wanted to share that information with you, and with the people that need to know in order for them to have overall a more successful life, or really just a happier life. And it really doesn't matter if you're in high school or if you're, just starting college. These are all things that you can really learn and develop as you progress through life. I want to add that it didn't always start out this way. I've definitely come a long way. In high school, I had like a 1.8 GPA. I barely passed my senior year. I tried out college. I dropped out. I worked a lot of different jobs, but I ultimately came back. And that's what we're going to get at today. We're going to be talking about kind of my journey and my path. And I hope that in some way it could kind of influence you, or at least have a little faith in what I say. Because who knows? You might be listening and you might be going through something in your life that kind of relates to what I went through in my path. And ultimately, that would give me an opportunity to teach you stuff that I wish someone taught me. It all started on November 10th, 1994. The room was filled with I'm just kidding. I'm not going to start off my story like that, but I do want you guys to know a little background behind my family upbringing and things like that. I basically grew up in a two-bedroom apartment, and I have three siblings. So, two older brothers, and then it's me, and then my little sister. My mom was pretty much a stay-at-home mom, a hairdresser sometimes, and my dad pretty much worked 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts, kind of as a cook at a Chinese restaurant. So definitely money was tight growing up, and we always had to kind of struggle to make ends meet. But, I don't know how my parents did it, but they got it done. I definitely want to start my story off in high school. So, throughout high school, I went to a school where the college going culture was pretty big. I think a lot of my friends were applying to college and things like that, but the information wasn't always there. So, I remember in high school, I definitely had a lot of fun. I was in a lot of clubs, and I had a lot of friends, and we always did a lot of social outings and things like that. I definitely ditched school a lot, and senior year, it got to a point where I got called into the principal's office, and my mom was there, and they were like, "Well, your mom says you've been going to school, but your attendance says otherwise." And I remember that really hit me, like, whoa, I could actually get in trouble. So I definitely started caring a little bit more my senior year, but by then it was a little too late. I remember going through my senior year, and all of my friends were like, "Oh, I'm applying to, UCLA, I'm applying to Cal State, Long Beach, and all these different great schools. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, man, what am I gonna do? And there was this kind of stigma around going to community college back then. And honestly, I still see it now that like community college were for the losers or for the students that weren't smart and things like that. And trust me, I'm telling you now throughout my experience that that is so not true, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But because of that stigma, I was really prideful, and I was just like, well, I don't want to go to community college. So I decided that I wanted to work full time right after high school. Mainly because I saw, I guess, growing up in my household, I realized that like money was really important, and that's what I wanted at first. I just wanted to make the most money as possible. So after high school, I got a job at T-Mobile where I worked full time, like 40 hours a week, pretty much 39.5 actually. And honestly, I had the time of my life working that job. I was kind of like this young kid. I was 18 working with people who were like 24, 25. And honestly, I learned so much from the T-Mobile team. I missed them dearly. And if you're on that T-Mobile team and you're hearing this now, just know that, you guys have done so much for me. But yeah, life was good. I was bringing in a lot of money for my age. And, I was going out on the weekends and having a good time and just really enjoying myself and enjoying my job. I would say definitely from this job, I learned a lot more about finance and the business aspect of things. I learned how to talk to people. I learned how to sell. And there's so many skills that you could learn in that. So I would encourage you to go get a job in sales at least once in your life because it really teaches you kind of more of the smaller intricacies, whether that's like psychology or just relationship building. And I definitely learned a lot working that job. But at the end of the day, after working there for about 2 years, I really didn't feel fulfilled. And what do I mean by that? I just sat around and I looked at a lot of my friends who were going to college or a lot of my friends who were progressing in other ways of their life. And I was just like, man, in 5 years, if I'm still here selling like the iPhone 15 or something, then I'm going to be really disappointed in myself. And that's not a knockoff of people who want to work in sales, right? That's great if that's, what you want to do and that's your passion. But for me, that just wasn't it. So I remember talking to one of my friends, his name's Edison, who was kind of like a mentor to me throughout high school. And I kind of haven't talked to him in a while after high school, but we reconnected and, he just graduated from UCLA. And I was just like, man, I wish I was as smart as you, right? That was the narrative. I was like, I wish I was as smart as you and I wish that I could do the things you do. And he told me like, look, I started off at community college and in 2 years I transferred to like one of the best schools in the nation. And, if I could do it, you can too. And those words always stuck to me because it showed me that, there's limitless potential out there as long as you're willing to do hard work. And that's something that he told me. He said, you don't need to be smart. You just need to be hardworking. And I was like, in some aspects, I feel like I work harder than anyone else. And that was my mentality back then. And I definitely took that with me into making all of my other goals. So I remember thinking like, all right, well, how do I do it? And I sat down with him and he kind of taught me the whole transferring process. And honestly, I had no idea what he was talking about, but all I knew was that I had to get started. So yeah, that's when I decided that I wanted to go back to school. Now, this was an extremely pivotal part of my life, and it's not really about just going back to school, but it's more about that leap of faith. At this time, I definitely had to give up my job because I couldn't do that full time and also go to school full time. It was just too much to handle and the scheduling didn't work out. So I had to drop this comfortable lifestyle where I was making good money and I was enjoying what I was doing to kind of invest in myself and to do something that I would end up loving more. So I actually started community college as an exercise science major, and really my motivation behind that was the fact that I really enjoyed working out and learning about the human body, but at the same time, I had a lot of pressure from my dad in particular. Like, typical stereotype for like Asians is, oh, you have to either be a doctor or an engineer or a scientist in order for you to be successful. And I definitely felt a lot of that pressure from him. He didn't say, oh, yeah, you have to do that or I'll disown you, but he would make little comments like, oh, how great it would be to have at least one son in the medical field and saying things like that. I really felt like, oh, I had to do it. I had to do it for him. And I took a lot of exercise science classes and I loved it. But I remember when I took human anatomy, like I just dreaded it and I hated it. And I'll touch base with that a little bit later. But I just want to mention that when I started out in community college, I was taking a lot of general ed courses and I really struggled because I really went on like a 2 year hiatus after high school. And even back then when I was in high school, I always saw myself as a bad student. Like I'm just not good at school. And it wasn't until I took a English 201 where I met one of my English professors professors, which just so happens to be one of my mentors today. She stuck with me throughout this long ride, and she really taught me a lot of the principles that I'll never forget, which is, being able to sit and identify what you're good at and what you can improve on. And if you can mix those things together, which is a great lesson she taught me, you can pretty much do anything. And it was through that experience and learning that about myself, and also just going through the science classes and the math classes, and I realized, I love that. The thing I love is that process, right? The process of improving and getting better. And I decided, like, my passion is not in exercise science. It's actually in education. It's the wealth and the gaining and the productivity and the progression and just knowledge. So I decided to switch it up. And, I didn't tell my parents or anything, but I ended up switching my major to psychology, because I just really thought that I would be more happy in that field, and I wanted to work in education. So in addition to going to school, I also applied to a bunch of different part-time jobs, and that really, really, really kind of solidified everything for me. I was struggling with my identity, my self-worth. I didn't know how I was going to pay for things, but it was through these experiences where I learned a lot more about myself. And I want to highlight a few of the jobs that I held while I was in community college. I worked at the Boys and Girls Club of America. So I worked for this after school program working with sixth graders to eighth graders, middle school kids, and I also worked at another after school program in LA, deep in downtown LA, and definitely some of the lower socioeconomic status parts of LA. And it definitely opened my eyes to how different other people's upbringings are, because I worked with elementary school kids and I saw like a lot of students who struggled at home and things of that nature. And it really opened up my eyes to that and really inspired me to try to make change in a bigger way, which ultimately had me decide to major in psychology and pursue education. So towards the end of my community college career, it was time to transfer, and I was definitely that one annoying student that went to a transfer center every single day. So for those of you who don't know, at community college, there are transfer centers where it's just a building that's committed to helping you transfer to a four-year university. And I'll talk about community college in another episode, but basically your goal is to finish your GEs and then transfer so that you could get your bachelor's degree. Like, that's the most common goal for community college. So I was applying to do that, and I was applying to transfer, and I was applying for all these different schools because I qualified for a fee waiver. And I remember I applied to two schools that were local, and I think actually six other schools that were more far away, because I was like, man, I want to get that college experience, right? Like, move out, live on my own. I thought that would be really cool. And at the end of the day, I got accepted. I think I made it into like 4 out of the 8 schools that I applied to. And ultimately, I had to decide if I wanted to commute or if I wanted to move 6 hours away. And just because of the way things were going on at home, I felt really bad. I couldn't leave my family because honestly, like, I had to help out my little sister and her development. And I really didn't want her to be alone. So I stayed back. And honestly, it was a great decision. But I ended up going to Cal State Northridge, which is about an hour away from my home. And I drove back and forth 2 days out of the week. And yeah, you know what? While doing that, because of my scheduling, I couldn't work for an after school program anymore. So I actually had to work for Starbucks for 2 years, and I learned so much working at Starbucks while I was doing my undergrad at Cal State Northridge. Working at Starbucks, I learned a lot about routine, rhythm, and doing things the right way. And the way that I learned those things was because at Starbucks, everything is based off of a routine. Like, everything is literally broken down into steps. And if you could do those steps the right way, you can apply them to so many other things in life. Starbucks is definitely one of the cleanest companies that will ever exist. Like, they're super clean about everything. They want to make sure that the customer is getting the best experience, but at the same time that they're also very healthy and everything's sanitized. And like, we used to dump out coffee that was like 30 minutes old because of the way it tasted. And it was just really crazy because it taught me how to do things the right way. And I really learned those things through my manager at the time. Her name's Vivian. So Vivi, if you're hearing this, thank you so much. Appreciate you. Definitely one of the best managers I've ever had, because she kind of taught me all those routines and rhythms, doing things the right way, like I mentioned, but also learning about limits and pushing them. My store opened sometimes at 4 and sometimes at 5 a.m. So what that meant was getting up like at 3:30 or at 4 a.m. to drive to this job that paid you okay, but it didn't pay you that well. And it was through doing that for 2 years, it really taught me my own potential and limits, and also creating that morning routine. Like, if I could do that for 4 years, there's no way I should be complaining about waking up at 7:30 a.m. 5 days a week, because I used to do that at 4. But while I was working at Starbucks, I was also going to school at the same time, like I said, at Cal State Northridge. And I remember during my first year at Cal State Northridge, I had to meet up with one of my academic advisors, which is like the person that counsels you and manages, your plans every semester, tells you which classes to take. And that's when I met Robert. Robert is also one of my mentors who's been helping me out along the way. And I saw something in Robert that he also saw in me, and it's that we were both very similar. We're both grew up in an Asian household, Asian males, and he had this pretty much a similar background to me. Worked different jobs and changed his major a few times, and ultimately it led him to where he is now, which is as an academic advisor. And I remember sitting there thinking like, okay, like this is kind of what I want to do. Like I want to guide and advise and help students kind of go through what I was going through. That really influenced me to learn more about his role. And after talking to him, I learned about graduate school. Like I didn't even know that graduate school was a thing for people other than, the medical degrees and stuff like that. And he told me like, hey, if you want to do college counseling or academic advising in a college setting, you're going to have to get a graduate degree, like your master's or something like that. So that really opened my eyes to that. And he definitely helped me up along the way. So he definitely helped me out the whole entire way, whether it's teaching me how to ask for letter of recommendations or drafting up my personal statement or just learning how to ace my graduate school interview. I definitely owe him a lot for that. And that was this whole entire separate process of my life, was actually applying to graduate school, like doing the research, learning which classes to take or which schools offer what. And that's when I went into the second portion of my life, which was actually applying for grad school. Now that was definitely one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I was definitely learning as I went, because no one else in my family had pretty much graduated from college, let alone gone to grad school. I mean, maybe like distant family, like cousins of cousins, but other than that, there was no one really there to kind of tell me what to do other than Robert. And even then, I only got to see him like once a month because he was busy with other students and things like that. But I definitely took the time to see him and get advice from him and others. And that's another key point that I want you to get at, is that you kind of get what you give at the end of the day. And if you're willing to give it all and to work hard towards something, then you're going to get that in return. Now, if you're kind of lazy and you just expect things to come to you, nothing will come to you. But anyway, as I was going through grad school, I had to go through an interview, a very intense interview, and it was a very intense process. But while I was doing that, I was also implementing one of the tips that Robert taught me, which is always have a backup plan. And I was applying to full-time jobs and things like that as I was finishing up my last semester of my bachelor's degree. So, I went on to graduate with my bachelor's degree in psychology, and it was a really awesome, awesome feeling because I'm a first generation college student, which means that my parents never went to college. So it felt really nice being, the first to go because, once you get a degree, it really creates generational change, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I think it was 3 days. Yeah, 3 days after graduation, I get a call from this unknown number, and it was actually the director of the graduate program that I applied for. It was the college counseling program at Cal State Northridge. And we talked for about 45 minutes because she was telling me that basically I was almost going to make it into grad school, but I didn't. And normally this is like a 5 to 10 minute conversation, but I remember I was so devastated and I was just like, I wanted to know why. And I asked her why specifically, like, what can I do better? What should I do next time? And yeah, and she pretty much told me a few things that I'll talk about in another episode. But yeah, I was declined from grad school, and that was for sure the lowest part of my life. And I didn't share it with anyone. I kind of kept it all inside because I'm very reserved. But the reason why it was the lowest point of my life is because I honestly can say that I've never worked harder at anything than applying for grad school. And to be disappointed, and I really felt like I failed. Like, even when I tried the hardest, it wasn't enough. And that really took a toll on me mentally. And, looking back, I definitely wish I shared more, like maybe with my brothers or something or with my friends. But I really just kept it inside because I didn't want people to feel bad for me, or more importantly, as I think about it now, I didn't want people to feel ashamed because I definitely felt ashamed in myself. About 2 days after, I was with my brother and I told him, and I was already like, yeah, so I'm going to start applying again and looking for other schools. And I remember he looked at me and he's like, bro, it's only been 2 days since you found out you didn't get in. Like, your application period isn't until another few months. Like, you should just chill. Like, just let it process. And I think that that's really an important thing in life too, right? It's just letting things process. I think it's the 76ers who says trust the process, and that's extremely important because things don't work themselves out, but if you work hard, like things will work themselves out. But it's not a product of luck or faith or anything like that. It's a product of your work. But anyway, literally like a week later, I get another call on my phone from an unrecognized number, and it was through one of the interviews that I had while I was in finishing up my bachelor's degree, and it was for the USC College Advising Corps. What this organization is, it's a nonprofit organization who partners with schools like USC, UCLA, UC Berkeley, schools all over the nation, Texas A&M, and those type of schools, where their goal or our goal is actually to put recent college grads in high schools to help those high school students apply for college or any post-secondary education. And I remember I got called for an interview, and I was able to ace the interview because I learned so many skills from my grad school interviews. And I accepted the role, and little did I know that this job here was gonna kind of make my life completely take off. And I remember my very first day of training, and it was pretty much like a classroom environment, but it was at USC, and I was meeting a lot of the other advisors. Some of them have worked for a year, some of them are starting fresh like me, and I do remember feeling a sense of what we call imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is something that I feel like many people experience at one point in their lives, and it's when they're placed in a new environment and they really don't know if they really belong there. And specifically, it's because they see people around them who might appear to be more successful or more knowledgeable than them, and they start to kind of question their own abilities. And that's something that I definitely felt. I mean, I was sitting in a room full of people who just graduate from like UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, Cal State Long Beach, all these great schools, and I just sat there thinking, like, you know what? Maybe I'm not even in the right place. Like, I started out at community college. How am I supposed to kind of compete with these people? But as training went on for about a month, I quickly learned that it really wasn't about that with this team. Like, everyone there was there for the same reason, and it's that they're passionate about helping others in a more broad sense. But in specifically, it's helping people achieve their, academic educational goals. It was through this role that I learned a lot about professional development. I was trained by some of the best people that can train you on whether it's educational things or life skills and things like that. I learned how to talk to people. I learned how to manage the dynamics of a different team and, working in different environments, working with people who are easy to work with, working with people who aren't so easy to work with. And it was through this role that I really learned and developed professionally. Now, on a personal level, I worked a lot with students and really helping them unlock their own potential. Like, that was my main goal. Like, I didn't care which school you were applying to or what your goal really was. I just wanted you to make sure that you were set up in a way that you can always constantly develop, and also in a way where you know that you can leave a mark on those that are going to come after you. Because the best way to really influence a whole entire generation is to make sure that generation is ready to influence other generations. And it's through this role that I got to meet some of the greatest students that I've ever met in my life. I've met so many hardworking students. Like, they work harder than me, and at times I feel like, man, should I even be giving this person advice? Like, they got it all made. Like, they got stuff figured out way more than when I was a kid, and it was just a really great experience overall, and it's really propelled me to really go into this field of work. And I owe so much of my success and so much of my knowledge to these kids, because believe it or not, they were advising me more than I was actually advising them, and I appreciate every single moment of it. But one of the saddest things is I was definitely really excited about seeing these kids graduate and cross stage and go through that whole experience, and then the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And when it hit, a lot of the students that I was working with actually kind of held back on their dreams, whether it was actually going to a four-year university or really didn't believe that they would get that college experience anymore. And it was really heartbreaking to see, but they still kept going, and they still kept pushing, and they still kept chasing their dreams, and that's great. But there's also a reality of a lot of students who aren't doing that, and a lot of students who might be facing these inequities in a more hardcore sense. Like, there are students who don't have their own private space, or they don't have internet, and it's very difficult for them to kind of propel themselves or to stay motivated. And I totally understand. And if that's you and you're listening to that, go ahead and listen to my other episode about still being able to learn online, because it will definitely help you out in there. But it's because of these experiences that I decided that I wanted to, make a show to address all these type of things and to offer kids or students or anyone really some advice on things that they don't really talk about. And that's how stuff I wish they taught me really came to fruition, and that's why we're here today. If you got this far, I just want to thank you guys so much for taking the time to listen and to learn a little bit about me. I hope that I could add a little context as to, where all of the knowledge and advice I get comes from. So basically, I'm really excited to start this journey. I know I'm going to be working and working on my education, but at the same time, I'm definitely committed to this show and also making sure that I'm able to provide really high quality content for everyone. So if you really like it, feel free to subscribe or send it over to a friend who you think might learn a little bit from this. And thank you so much for listening.